Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie It Ends With Us, 2024, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It begins softly, not with a scream or a grand explosion, but with the quiet rhythm of a heart trying to find its way back to itself. It Ends With Us, the 2024 film adaptation of Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel, doesn't arrive with the gloss of fantasy or the sheen of action. It arrives like a memory. Personal. Raw. Unshakable. The kind of story that lingers under the skin long after the credits roll, whispering truths about love, hurt, and the impossible choices in between. At its surface, this is a romantic drama. A love triangle. A story about a woman torn between a past that never truly let her go and a present that promises everything she thought she wanted. But dig deeper, just a few inches beneath the surface, and you'll find something else entirely. It Ends With Us is a confrontation. With trauma. With legacy. With the lies we tell ourselves to survive. And for millions of readers who lived through the novel's haunting honesty, this cinematic adaptation is more than a film. It's a reckoning. The story follows Lily Bloom, brilliant, brave, and quietly unraveling. Played by Blake Lively with a performance that burns slow but steady, Lily is not the damsel we're used to. She's already escaped a childhood shaped by violence, a home that never quite felt safe, and she's forged her path in Boston, building her own floral business from dreams and defiance. She blooms, literally and metaphorically, in the shadows of the pain she refuses to let define her. But just when the petals begin to open, life shifts. Enter Ryle Kincaid, a neurosurgeon with a jawline sharp enough to cut through hesitation and a presence that feels like stepping into warm water, safe at first and then all-consuming. Their chemistry is instant. But it's not the cliché kind of whirlwind. It's messy, charged, full of red flags that Lily, like many of us, chooses to see through rose-tinted lenses. Justin Baldoni plays Ryle with a layered duality that is both magnetic and unsettling. He is passion personified, until passion becomes something else. Something darker. And that's where the story begins to turn. Because just when Lily believes she's found her forever, her past walks back in through the door. Atlas Corrigan. The boy who once saved her. The boy she saved in return. Their love, first discovered between abandoned houses and battered memories, was the kind that felt too fragile to last. And yet, when Atlas, played with aching restraint and warmth by Sklenar, returns, he brings with him the ghost of a life Lily thought she'd buried. Not just a love, but a truth. A reminder of who she used to be, before survival turned her into someone else. The film navigates these timelines with grace. Flashbacks are interwoven into the present like flickers of scent or sudden song, the way real memories work. They're not exposition. They're emotion. We watch young Lily and young Atlas carve out a sanctuary from the wreckage of their teenage worlds. We watch them fall in love in moments that are quiet, stolen, sacred. And when the present version of Atlas reappears, we don't just see an old flame, we feel the burn that never really went out. But this isn't a traditional love triangle. There are no heroes or villains in It Ends With Us. There is only pain. And choice. And the weight of generational trauma pressing down like gravity. As Lily's relationship with Ryle spirals, from ecstasy to emotional cracks to violence, the film doesn't shy away. It doesn't dress it up. It doesn't flinch. It stares. It holds. And that's where it hits hardest. Because it forces the audience into Lily's shoes, not to question if she should leave, but to understand why it's never that simple. The shame. The hope. The horror of loving someone who hurts you. The fear of becoming the parent you promised you'd never become. Blake Lively carries this burden with staggering vulnerability. Her Lily is strong, but not in the way we're used to seeing strength. She's not hard. She's not invincible. She breaks. But she chooses. Again and again. She chooses herself. And that's what makes her unforgettable. One of the film's most powerful sequences unfolds late in the story, during a storm both literal and emotional. Lily, after one too many betrayals, finally opens the letter she once wrote to her younger self, a letter sealed years ago, buried under heartbreak and time. It's a cinematic turning point, where past and present crash together in a montage of bruised skin, trembling hands, and the haunting echo of her mother's voice. We repeat what we don't repair. The line becomes the movie's heartbeat. Its thesis. Its call to action. In the background, the film's aesthetic hums with intimacy. The score, minimal, piano-driven, often just silence, lets the scenes breathe. The cinematography lingers, sometimes a little too long, making you sit in discomfort, in stillness, in the moments most stories rush past. Lighting is warm and golden in the moments of safety, turning cold and sterile in moments of collapse. It's not showy. It's not flashy. It's felt. Even the film's use of space becomes symbolic. Lily's flower shop, with its carefully arranged chaos, mirrors her internal world. Her apartment, once a haven, slowly becomes claustrophobic as Ryle's presence overtakes it. The hospital scenes are sterile, almost devoid of color, because that's where Ryle shines, where he controls. But nature, memory, and Atlas are always framed in softer, earthier tones, signaling not fantasy, but truth. There's also a quiet brilliance in how the film treats its men. Ryle is not a monster. And that's what makes him terrifying. He's loving, funny, brilliant, until he's not. The transformation is slow, disorienting, and deeply real. It's a portrayal that refuses to simplify abuse. Justin Baldoni doesn't lean into villainy, he leans into contradiction. Into the unbearable tension of someone who can love deeply and still cause deep harm. Someone who doesn't hit because he's evil, but because he's broken. And yet, the film never lets that be an excuse. It draws a hard line. Understanding is not the same as justification. Empathy is not a pardon. He's not a savior. He doesn't arrive to rescue Lily. He's quiet, patient, present, the antithesis of chaos. Their reunion is not a fairy tale, it's a question. One Lily answers not with grand gestures, but with a single devastating act of choice. Because that's the twist It Ends With Us carries in its title. It's not about a romance. It's not even about abuse. It's about ending cycles. It's about a woman standing at the edge of everything she's ever known, with a child in her arms and a storm in her chest, and saying, "It ends here. With me." That moment, simple, seismic, stunning, shakes the ground beneath the film. It reframes everything. And when the screen fades, what lingers isn't just sadness or catharsis. It's clarity. The clarity of knowing that some stories aren't about falling in love. They're about learning how to love yourself enough to walk away. It Ends With Us does what the best adaptations rarely dare to do. It honors the source material while becoming something entirely cinematic. It doesn't preach. It doesn't manipulate. It invites. It opens the door for a conversation that too often stays hidden in whispers. And for every woman who's ever stayed too long, for every person who's ever loved someone who hurt them, this story becomes more than fiction. It becomes a mirror. It becomes a choice. And for Lily Bloom, for the girl who bloomed in the darkest soil, it becomes a beginning. Not with a kiss. Not with a rescue. But with a promise. That it ends with her. Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie It Ends With Us, 2024, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. It begins softly. Not with a scream or a grand explosion, but with the quiet rhythm of a heart trying to find its way back to itself. It Ends With Us, the 2024 film adaptation of Colleen Hoover's best-selling novel, doesn't arrive with the gloss of fantasy or the sheen of action. It arrives like a memory. Personal. Raw. Unshakable. The kind of story that lingers under the skin long after the credits roll, whispering truths about love, hurt, and the impossible choices in between. At its surface, this is a romantic drama. A love triangle. A story about a woman torn between a past that never truly let her go and a present that promises everything she thought she wanted. But dig deeper, just a few inches beneath the surface, and you'll find something else entirely. It Ends With Us is a confrontation. With trauma. With legacy. With the lies we tell ourselves to survive. And for millions of readers who lived through the novel's haunting honesty, this cinematic adaptation is more than a film. It's a reckoning. The story follows Lily Bloom, brilliant, brave, and quietly unraveling. Played by Blake Lively with a performance that burns slow but steady, Lily is not the damsel we're used to. She's already escaped a childhood shaped by violence, a home that never quite felt safe, and she's forged her path in Boston, building her own floral business from dreams and defiance. She blooms, literally and metaphorically, in the shadows of the pain she refuses to let define her. But just when the petals begin to open, life shifts. Enter Ryle Kincaid, a neurosurgeon with a jawline sharp enough to cut through hesitation and a presence that feels like stepping into warm water, safe at first and then all-consuming. Their chemistry is instant. But it's not the cliché kind of whirlwind. It's messy, charged, full of red flags that Lily, like many of us, chooses to see through rose-tinted lenses. Justin Baldoni plays Ryle with a layered duality that is both magnetic and unsettling. He is passion personified, until passion becomes something else. Something darker. And that's where the story begins to turn. Because just when Lily believes she's found her forever, her past walks back in through the door. Atlas Corrigan. The boy who once saved her. The boy she saved in return. Their love, first discovered between abandoned houses and battered memories, was the kind that felt too fragile to last. And yet, when Atlas, played with aching restraint and warmth by Sklenar, returns, he brings with him the ghost of a life Lily thought she'd buried. Not just a love, but a truth. A reminder of who she used to be, before survival turned her into someone else. The film navigates these timelines with grace. Flashbacks are interwoven into the present like flickers of scent or sudden song, the way Rayall memories work. They're not exposition. They're emotion. We watch young Lily and young Atlas carve out a sanctuary from the wreckage of their teenage worlds. We watch them fall in love in moments that are quiet, stolen, sacred. And when the present version of Atlas reappears, we don't just see an old flame, we feel the burn that never really went out. But this isn't a traditional love triangle. There are no heroes or villains in It Ends With Us. There is only pain. And choice. And the weight of generational trauma pressing down like gravity. As Lily's relationship with Ryle spirals, from ecstasy to emotional cracks to violence, the film doesn't shy away. It doesn't dress it up. It doesn't flinch. It stares. It holds. And that's where it hits hardest. Because it forces the audience into Lily's shoes, not to question if she should leave, but to understand why it's never that simple. The shame. The hope. The horror of loving someone who hurts you. The fear of becoming the parent you promised you'd never become. Blake Lively carries this burden with staggering vulnerability. Her Lily is strong, but not in the way we're used to seeing strength. She's not hard. She's not invincible. She breaks. But she chooses. Again and again. She chooses herself. And that's what makes her unforgettable. One of the film's most powerful sequences unfolds late in the story, during a storm both literal and emotional. Lily, after one too many betrayals, finally opens the letter she once wrote to her younger self, a letter sealed years ago, buried under heartbreak and time. It's a cinematic turning point, where past and present crash together in a montage of bruised skin, trembling hands, and the haunting echo of her mother's voice. We repeat what we don't repair. The line becomes the movie's heartbeat, its thesis, its call to action. In the background, the film's aesthetic hums with intimacy. The score, minimal, piano-driven, often just silence, lets the scenes breathe. The cinematography lingers, sometimes a little too long, making you sit in discomfort, in stillness, in the moments most stories rush past. Lighting is warm and golden in the moments of safety, turning cold and sterile in moments of collapse. It's not showy. It's not flashy. It's felt. Even the film's use of space becomes symbolic. Lily's flower shop, with its carefully arranged chaos, mirrors her internal world. Her apartment, once a haven, slowly becomes claustrophobic as Ryle's presence overtakes it. The hospital scenes are sterile, almost devoid of color, because that's where Ryle shines, where he controls. But nature, memory, and Atlas are always framed in softer, earthier tones, signaling not fantasy, but truth. There's also a quiet brilliance in how the film treats its men. Ryle is not a monster. And that's what makes him terrifying. He's loving, funny, brilliant, until he's not. The transformation is slow, disorienting, and deeply real. It's a portrayal that refuses to simplify abuse. Justin Baldoni doesn't lean into villainy, he leans into contradiction. Into the unbearable tension of someone who can love deeply and still cause deep harm. Someone who doesn't hit because he's evil, but because he's broken. And yet, the film never lets that be an excuse. It draws a hard line. Understanding is not the same as justification. Empathy is not a pardon. And Atlas? He's not a savior. He doesn't arrive to rescue Lily. He's quiet, patient, present, the antithesis of chaos. Their reunion is not a fairy tale, it's a question. One Lily answers not with grand gestures, but with a single devastating act of choice. Because that's the twist It Ends With Us carries in its title. It's not about a romance. It's not even about abuse. It's about ending cycles. It's about a woman standing at the edge of everything she's ever known, with a child in her arms and a storm in her chest, and saying, "It ends here. With me." That moment, simple, seismic, stunning, shakes the ground beneath the film. It reframes everything. And when the screen fades, what lingers isn't just sadness or catharsis. It's clarity. The clarity of knowing that some stories aren't about falling in love. They're about learning how to love yourself enough to walk away. It Ends With Us does what the best adaptations rarely dare to do. It honors the source material while becoming something entirely cinematic. It doesn't preach. It doesn't manipulate. It invites. It opens the door for a conversation that too often stays hidden in whispers. And for every woman who's ever stayed too long, for every person who's ever loved someone who hurt them, this story becomes more than fiction. It becomes a mirror. It becomes a choice. And for Lily Bloom, for the girl who bloomed in the darkest soil, it becomes a beginning. Not with a kiss. Not with a rescue. But with a promise. That it ends with her. The story doesn't open with heartbreak. Not at first. It opens with something simpler. A funeral. A city skyline. A girl standing still while everything around her moves. Lily Bloom isn't the kind of character who bursts into a story. She drifts in, quietly, thoughtfully, with a softness that hides the steel just underneath. She stands on a rooftop in Boston, staring down at the street, reflecting on the man they just buried. Her father. A man she never loved. A man who never loved her properly. The eulogy she gave was honest, not about forgiveness or legacies, but about truth. And that, right away, is what sets the tone. This is not a story about perfection. It's a story about scars. About survival. About what comes after the pain when you finally say it out loud. After the funeral, Lily walks through the city like someone trying to find something familiar in a place that's constantly changing. She's not from Boston. She moved here to escape her past and plant new roots. Literally. A florist by trade, she's in the early stages of launching her own flower shop. But this isn't just about business. For Lily, it's about reclaiming something beautiful. Something hers. Flowers were what her mother used to grow, even on the worst days. Even after the bruises. And so, every bloom Lily touches feels like a silent rebellion against the home she came from. And then, one night, it happens. Not dramatically. Not with music swelling or eyes locking from across a crowded room. It happens on a rooftop. Same one. Different day. She meets Ryle. He's there because he's frustrated, kicking at furniture, cursing into the sky. She interrupts his storm with a casual observation, and their banter begins. It's electric. Unexpected. The kind of chemistry that sneaks up and curls its fingers around your pulse before you even notice. He's a neurosurgeon, brilliant and ambitious, carrying a kind of intensity that flickers between charming and intimidating. But he's honest. He tells her right away, he doesn't do relationships. Doesn't believe in them. Too busy. Too focused. But still, he kisses her. And still, she kisses him back. The moment is brief. Fleeting. They go their separate ways. She tells herself it meant nothing. A spark, nothing more. But of course, sparks leave burns. Time passes. Lily throws herself into her dream, rents a storefront, paints the walls, scrapes together the beginnings of her flower shop. She's building something from scratch, just like she always does. Independent. Determined. Alone. And then Ryle returns. He walks into her store like it's fate. Like the universe decided the rooftop wasn't finished with them. This time, he's ready. Or at least he says he is. He wants something real. He wants her. And slowly, Lily lets herself believe it. Their relationship unfolds like a dream. He cooks. He listens. He pushes her to believe in herself. When her shop opens, he's there with champagne and support. The passion is undeniable, charged, physical, urgent. Ryle is intense in everything he does, including how he loves her. And for a while, it feels like maybe this is the reward. Maybe after all the pain, all the lessons, Lily has found someone who sees her. Who chooses her. But there are cracks. Tiny at first. Easy to excuse. The first sign comes in a flash. Quick, like lightning. A moment of anger. A door slammed too hard. A grip that lasts a second too long. He apologizes. Profusely. Tells her he's never done that before. That it wasn't who he is. That he's scared because of how much he cares. Lily listens. She believes him. Because that's what love asks of you sometimes. To see the best version of someone and hold on to it like a lifeline. Still, the past doesn't stay quiet for long. One day, by pure coincidence, she runs into someone she hasn't seen in years. A ghost. A heartbeat. Atlas Corrigan. The boy who once lived in an abandoned house behind hers. The boy she used to sneak food to. The boy who gave her first kiss, her first safe place, her first real sense that love could be something gentle. Seeing Atlas again doesn't bring back old feelings. It brings back truth. Suddenly, Lily is 16 again, reading old letters she wrote to Ellen DeGeneres about how she fell in love with a homeless boy who taught her to make grilled cheese on a camp stove and read poetry by flashlight. Those memories aren't just sentimental. They're anchors. Reminders of who she used. Atlas is older now. Calmer. He's built a life of his own, runs a restaurant, looks at Lily like no time has passed. But he doesn't belong in her life anymore. At least, that's what she tells herself. Ryle doesn't see it that way. When he finds out about Atlas, about the past they shared, something shifts. His jealousy isn't just loud. It's violent. Not fists, not yet. But words. Cold. Cutting. And again, Lily finds herself making excuses. This is how trauma works. It doesn't just haunt you. It shapes you. Teaches you to question your instincts. To believe that maybe you caused the storm. Maybe you need to fix it. Still, there are good days. Ryle is charming. Brilliant. He saves lives. He tells her he's sorry. That he'll do better. That he'll change. And for a while, Lily holds on. Because love is patient, right? Love is worth it. But love, Lily begins to realize, should never hurt like this. Be before the world tried to teach her fear. As Ryle's temper worsens, the truth becomes harder to ignore. The second incident leaves her stunned, physically. A moment she didn't see coming, a shift that doesn't feel real. He's crying before she can even speak. And she does what so many survivors do, she freezes. She tells herself it's the last time. That she won't let it happen again. That this is the man she loves, and love is complicated. And then Atlas reappears. This time, he doesn't ask to stay in her life. He simply shows up when she needs him most. Not as a savior. Not as a solution. Just as someone who remembers who she was. Who she is. Someone who tells her, you are not crazy. You are not imagining this. You deserve to be safe. For Lily, it's not just a reunion. It's a reckoning. Her childhood flashes back in sharp, painful bursts. Her mother, silent after every slap. The way her father yelled, then apologized, then did it all again. She remembers the time she watched her mom pack a suitcase but never leave. She remembers promising herself, I will never be like her. I will never stay. But here she is. And so the question becomes, how do you leave when you love someone? And that's where the story begins to turn. Lily starts writing again. To herself. To Ellen. To the past. Her journal entries are raw, honest, filled with doubt and fire. She doesn't have answers. But she has resolve. And sometimes, that's enough. She pulls away. Sets boundaries. Tells Ryle she needs space. And that's when everything comes crashing down. The truth. The confrontation. The consequences. And then, something else happens. She finds out she's pregnant. And that one revelation unravels every thread of the life she thought she was rebuilding. Because now it's not just about her. It's about a child. A future. A legacy. And she has to decide, does it end with me? The answer doesn't come easy. It never does. But in that question, Lily begins to find her power. Not in rage, not in revenge, but in choice. And this time, she chooses differently. The days that follow her discovery feel suspended in a strange, bittersweet kind of fog. Lily Bloom, standing in the quiet aftermath of revelation, knows one thing with absolute certainty now: there is no going back. Not to the version of herself that once believed love was enough to heal someone else's damage. Not to the version of Ryle who existed before his hand ever struck her. And certainly not to the illusions she tried so hard to protect. Still, what lies ahead isn't clarity, it's chaos. The future has never felt so frightening, especially with a life growing inside her. A child who hasn't even drawn its first breath, and yet already demands from her the kind of strength she's never had to summon before. Ryle's apologies come like clockwork. Tearful, desperate, and meticulously rehearsed. He doesn't know about the pregnancy yet. Lily keeps that to herself in the beginning, unsure whether the knowledge would soften him or weaponize him. Her silence isn't cowardice. It's strategy. She's seen too many versions of this man by now. He's the lover, the healer, the monster, the regretful shadow of himself. And she knows better than to gamble with his emotions when the stakes have never been higher. So she does what she always does. She leans into her work. The flower shop becomes her sanctuary, its familiar routine anchoring her in a reality she can control. But even that solace is temporary. Boston, once her escape, starts to feel smaller, more dangerous. She can sense Ryle's presence everywhere, in the way her phone vibrates with unanswered texts, in the way her heart stutters every time the door chime rings and she wonders if it's him. Eventually, the truth finds its way out, as it always does. She tells him, carefully, in a public place. Her voice doesn't tremble, though her hands do. I'm pregnant. The silence that follows is thick enough to smother. Ryle doesn't yell. He doesn't cry. He just stares at her, stunned, as though this new reality is a betrayal rather than a consequence. And in his eyes, for one fleeting moment, Lily sees the man he could have been, the man she wanted him to be. But then it's gone. He tells her he wants to be involved, that they should get back together, raise their child as a family. He promises, again, that it will be different, that the baby changes everything. But Lily knows better now. She tells him no. She says it clearly, firmly. And this time, she doesn't take it back. That moment is one of the film's quietest and most powerful climaxes. There's no screaming, no dramatic collapse. Just a woman choosing peace over possibility. And it devastates Ryle. He's not used to losing. Not like this. He begs. He threatens. He pleads again. And Lily does what her mother never could. She walks away. The pregnancy moves forward in a blur of doctor visits, nausea, and quiet nights filled with scribbled journal entries and fading flower petals. Lily grows. In strength, in resolve, in love for the child she hasn't yet met. And slowly, like frost melting from the edge of winter, the pain begins to dull. Not disappear, but dull. Enough that she can breathe again without flinching. Atlas re-enters her life in those months, not forcefully, but with the gentleness that's always defined him. He doesn't push. He offers. He brings food. He checks in. He tells her stories of his restaurant, of his own growing pains, of the life he built from scratch. And with him, Lily doesn't have to pretend. She doesn't have to shrink herself or smile when it hurts. With Atlas, she's safe. But safety doesn't always mean readiness. When Atlas first offers more, a chance at something real, Lily hesitates. Not because she doesn't care. She does. Deeply. But because she's learned that healing isn't something someone else can do for you. It's a process. A slow unraveling of fear. A choice made again and again, in every quiet moment when no one is watching. Still, life keeps moving forward. The birth scene arrives not as a dramatic crescendo, but as a culmination of everything Lily has fought for. It's intimate, unadorned. A hospital room filled with sterile lights and emotional weight. Ryle is there. She allows it, not for him, but for their daughter. Because Lily understands that protecting her child doesn't mean erasing her father. It means creating boundaries that never bend. She names the baby Emerson, Emmy, for short. A name that feels like sunlight after the storm. Holding her daughter, Lily doesn't cry. Not right away. She just stares. Takes her in. Every finger, every breath. And in that moment, all the doubt, all the heartbreak, all the choices that once felt like cliffs become something else entirely. They become worth it. It's only after returning home, after the nursery is set up and the visitors stop arriving, that Lily finds herself truly alone with the weight of her new world. And it's there, in that fragile silence, that she finally writes the last letter to her younger self. She doesn't sugarcoat it. She writes about the love that turned dark, about the hands that shook with rage, about the hope that held on too long. And then she writes about Atlas, about the steady presence, the patience, the way his love never came with a price. She writes about Emmy, about cycles ending, about strength being quiet, about how survival is not the end of the story. It's the beginning. The final twist, if it can even be called that, is that Lily doesn't end the film in a new relationship. Not immediately. She doesn't ride off with Atlas or fall into his arms. She walks into his restaurant one afternoon, Emmy asleep in her stroller, and tells him she's ready. Not for the past, but for something new. Something earned. He smiles. No declarations. No dramatic music. Just a simple, knowing nod. That's how It Ends With Us chooses to close. Not with fireworks, but with peace. It's a resolution that feels like a breath you didn't realize you were holding. The story, so full of tension and trauma, finally settles. Because the real ending was never about who Lily would choose. It was about what she would choose, herself. And in that choice, in that single radical act of love, everything changes. Not loudly, but completely. Lily Bloom does not arrive on screen like most romantic leads. She doesn't command attention through theatrics or walk into a room lit with spotlight confidence. She enters quietly, measured, steady, and observant. And yet, somehow, within moments, she's unforgettable. Not because she's polished, or perfect, or even because she makes all the right choices. Quite the opposite. She is compelling because she's flawed. Because she doubts. Because she stays longer than she should, and still finds the strength to leave. Because her journey is not just a love story, it's a transformation. A reclaiming of her voice from the echoes of the past. Lily is built from contrasts. She is soft, but never weak. Resilient, but never hardened. She wears her past like a second skin, invisible to those who don't look closely, but always there. Growing up in an abusive home left her with scars that don't show up on her face. They show up in the way she flinches at loud voices, in the way she watches people a second longer before trusting them, in the walls she's built around herself. And yet, those same experiences gave her an unmatched emotional depth, a sensitivity that allows her to love deeply, fiercely, and fully. She begins the story standing over her father's grave, not mourning him but trying to understand how to reconcile the man who hurt her mother with the man the world insists on remembering kindly. That moment reveals everything. Lily doesn't live in denial. She faces pain head-on, questions it, dissects it. And when she falls in love with Ryle Kincaid, it's not because she's naive. It's because she wants to believe in the possibility of something different. She wants to believe that people can be better than their worst moments. Ryle is the next figure to examine, and he is one of the most complicated portrayals in the film. He isn't a one-dimensional villain. He's not monstrous in the traditional sense. In fact, in many ways, he's the man so many people would fall for. He's smart, ambitious, charming. He carries himself with a kind of confidence that makes rooms turn. But beneath that allure is a temper, a volatile undercurrent that comes alive not in bursts, but in cracks. Moments of silence stretched too tight, moments of fury masked as passion. The film does something brave in how it builds Ryle. It makes you like him. It lets you see why Lily does. He's not cruel in every scene. He's tender, generous. And then, without warning, the violence slips in, not as a storm, but as a sudden shift in the wind. A shove, a grip, a slap, and then tears, apologies, promises. The cycle begins. Ryle's character isn't just about abuse. It's about the dissonance between the version of himself he wants to be and the one he can't control. That inner war makes him human. But the film never lets that humanity excuse his actions. Instead, it forces us to reckon with a difficult truth. Love is not a reason to stay in pain. The way Lily responds to Ryle, her denial, her bargaining, her hope, mirrors the reality of countless survivors. She doesn't walk away the first time, because nothing in her life has taught her that it's that simple. She stays because she sees the man he is when he's not hurting her. She stays because part of her wonders if she could be the one to change him. But slowly, painfully, she realizes, love doesn't work that way. And her decision to leave, especially after learning she's pregnant, becomes the film's most powerful moment of agency. Enter Atlas Corrigan, the boy from Lily's past who becomes something else entirely in her present. Atlas is calm where Ryle is chaos, patient where Ryle is fire. But he is not a savior. He's not here to rescue Lily from her life. He's here to remind her of who she was before the world convinced her she wasn't enough. His presence in the story isn't just about romance. It's about healing, about reflection, about seeing yourself through the eyes of someone who once loved you when you had nothing and still sees your worth now. Atlas is deeply rooted in empathy. As a teenager, he was homeless, sleeping in an abandoned house, struggling to survive. Lily's kindness changed his world, and in return, he gave her the kind of love that asked for nothing. As adults, their reunion is cautious. Atlas doesn't press. He observes. He listens. He's not perfect, but he understands boundaries. And in doing so, he becomes a foil to Ryle, a symbol not of what Lily needs, but of what love should look like. Uncomplicated, safe, free of violence or apology. The dynamic between these three characters is the heart of the film. Not because it's a love triangle, It Ends With Us is not that kind of story, but because each man represents a different part of Lily's journey. Ryle represents the generational trauma she has to end. Atlas represents the possibility of a new legacy. And Lily stands between them, choosing not who to love, but how to love herself. Even the secondary characters serve to enrich this emotional tapestry. Lily's mother, once silent in the face of abuse, becomes a source of quiet wisdom. Her transformation is subtle, but meaningful. When Lily finally opens up to her about Ryle, expecting judgment or denial, she's met instead with sorrow and understanding. "I stayed," her mother says. "You don't have to." In that one line, decades of pain are past and released. It's a moment that bridges two generations of women and seals Lily's resolve. Alyssa, Ryle's sister and Lily's close friend, is another layered presence. Torn between her love for her brother and her loyalty to Lily, she embodies the conflict so many people feel when someone they care about is both victim and perpetrator. She doesn't excuse Ryle, but she also struggles with the enormity of what it means to hold him accountable. Her relationship with Lily fractures, mends, and reshapes, just like everything else in Lily's world. And then there's Emmy, the child, the future, the silent character who never speaks a word but drives every decision Lily makes in the second half of the story. Emmy represents the break in the cycle, the fresh start, the reason Lily finally sees the truth with clarity. Through her, Lily understands that love, when twisted, doesn't justify endurance. That leaving isn't failure, it's freedom. Emmy is the anchor, the beginning, not the end. By the time the film closes, every character has evolved. Not through grand gestures, but through hard choices. Lily is not the same woman who stood on that rooftop at the beginning. She's more than her past, more than her pain. She is a mother now, a survivor, a woman who chose to end something so her daughter wouldn't have to repeat it. In most stories, characters change because something happens to them. In It Ends With Us, they change because they finally see themselves and decide they can be more. That's what makes this film so devastating and so necessary. Because in Lily Bloom, we don't just see a fictional heroine. We see someone we know. We see someone we've been. And when she says the words, "It ends with us," she's not just breaking a pattern. She's beginning a legacy. Sometimes, a film is so emotionally charged on the surface that you'd think the making of it would have to be serious, moody, and restrained behind the scenes too. But It Ends With Us wasn't quite like that. Despite its weighty themes, its legacy as a viral phenomenon, and the fact that it's adapted from a book that sent millions into spirals of emotional upheaval, the making of the movie unfolded in a way that was far more unpredictable than anyone expected. Strange coincidences, unexpected casting choices, wardrobe controversies, and even a screenplay that morphed while filming. It Ends With Us gathered a trail of odd little stories along its way, like petals dropped from Lily Bloom's flower shop. And when you pull those petals together, they reveal a behind-the-scenes portrait that's just as fascinating as the film itself. Let's begin with something that set the internet ablaze long before the first trailer even dropped, the casting controversy. When it was announced that Blake Lively had been cast as Lily Bloom, the internet had feelings, a lot of them. For one, Blake was significantly older than the character in the book, who was originally written to be in her early 20s. The same criticism followed Justin Baldoni's casting as Ryle, who in the novel is supposed to be a brilliant neurosurgeon in his 20s. But here's the twist. Colleen Hoover, the author of the book, agreed with the critics. In a rare move, she publicly addressed the backlash and admitted that if she were writing the book now, she wouldn't have made Lily and Ryle that young. "That was my fault," she said. "I wasn't experienced in publishing back then. I wrote them too young for the kind of story they go through." So in the movie, they aged the characters up, and with that, a massive script rewrite was ordered just weeks before filming began. The strange part? The revised version felt even more grounded than the original. The gravitas that Blake and Justin brought to the roles only deepened the emotional weight of the story. As unexpected as the casting seemed at first, it turned out to be the kind of gamble that actually worked. Then came the wardrobe issue. And no, this wasn't your usual costume design conflict. This one made headlines for the most unexpected reason: the pants. Specifically, Lily Bloom's weird pants, as seen in the first leaked set photos. Social media erupted with hot takes and meme threads as photos showed Blake Lively in oversized pink corduroy pants and fuzzy sweaters that looked more vintage thrift shop than modern Boston florist. But again, the filmmakers weren't fazed. The costumes were intentional, designed to reflect Lily's personality, a mix of soft rebellion, romantic idealism, and practicality. Blake herself chimed in, saying, "We wanted her wardrobe to feel lived in. Real. Like she gets dressed for herself, not for anyone else." And somehow, those pants became symbolic of the film's approach: imperfect, raw, and unapologetically human. Filming took place in Hoboken, New Jersey, which doubled for Boston thanks to its winding streets and historic East Coast architecture. But here's the strange part: the production was plagued by the noisiest summer ever recorded in Hoboken. Between street parades, sudden construction work, and a neighborhood dog who howled every time someone said, "Action," sound design became a daily nightmare. The crew had to ADR, that's automated dialogue replacement, nearly 35% of the outdoor scenes in post-production because of environmental noise. It added weeks to the editing process, but ironically gave the sound team extra room to craft the emotional tone of the film's quieter, more introspective moments. "The silence became our weapon," the sound editor later said. Every breath mattered more. Blake Lively, who not only starred in the film but also had significant creative input as an executive producer, brought something deeply personal to the set: her own journals. Not from her youth, but from her early days in Hollywood. She shared them with the director and screenwriter to help shape the emotional rhythm of Lily's inner world, especially during the scenes where she reflects on her past. Several of the lines used in Lily's monologues were reworked using that inspiration, layering the character with real-world vulnerability and voice. One such line, "I am not just surviving, I am choosing," wasn't in the original script. It was added late in post-production after a test screening where audience members said they wanted to see Lily own her journey a little more directly. As for Justin Baldoni, who played Ryle and also directed the film, his dual role created some of the most unexpected production quirks. During one of the most intense emotional scenes, where Ryle breaks down after the first violent incident, Baldoni finished performing the take, walked off camera, then immediately stepped behind the monitor to rewatch it for performance and camera blocking. Crew members described it as a strange and mesmerizing moment. The actor crumbling into pieces on screen, then seconds later, the director calmly giving notes on lighting and pacing. One assistant joked, "It was like watching Jekyll and Hyde, but if they were both heartbroken." Brandon Sklenar, who stepped into the role of Atlas, brought a quiet energy to the set that many described as anchoring. And perhaps the strangest coincidence of all? Sklenar and Hoover apparently both grew up reading the same obscure poetry collection, and one of those poems made it into the final cut of the movie. The scene where Atlas shares a line of poetry with Lily wasn't scripted. It came from a conversation between Sklenar and Lively between takes. The words resonated so deeply with the team that the director rewrote the scene on the spot to include it. Moments like that, spontaneous, serendipitous, peppered the filming process, giving the story an even more textured, organic feel. But perhaps one of the most haunting behind-the-scenes decisions was made in silence. No music. During a key scene where Lily lies in bed after being hurt by Ryle, the original plan called for a soft, somber score. But on the day of editing, something didn't feel right. So the director made the call to strip all sound from the moment. No music, no dialogue, no ambient noise. Just stillness. And it worked. The result was suffocating, visceral. One test audience member said, "That silence was louder than any scream." And that's exactly what they wanted. Of course, no production is complete without a little superstition. On the first day of filming, one of the crew members gifted the cast a bouquet of lilies, white lilies, to be exact. Beautiful, fragrant, symbolic. But as any florist or horror movie fan will tell you, white lilies are traditionally used at funerals. Some cast members took it as a nod to Lily's name. Others weren't so sure. Superstition spread like wildfire, and by day 3, the flowers had mysteriously disappeared from set. No one ever admitted to removing them. But they were never replaced. Then there's the trivia only true fans would notice. In Lily's flower shop, nestled on the back shelf behind the counter, there's a small, framed photo of a teenage girl holding a copy of the original It Ends With Us book. That girl? A longtime fan who had written a letter to Colleen Hoover years ago saying the book helped her leave an abusive relationship. The production team reached out to her, flew her to set, and gave her a cameo as a customer in the background of one of the early scenes. It's blink and you'll miss it. But it's there. And it says everything about how seriously the filmmakers took the story's emotional impact. One of the most unexpected guests on set? Colleen Hoover herself. But not just for a polite visit. She played an extra. In one of the scenes where Lily hosts a soft opening for her flower shop, there's a woman in a blue coat browsing the bouquets and sipping coffee. That's Hoover. And the flowers she picks? Peonies. Her favorite. She wanted no lines, no fanfare. Just a moment of being part of the world she created. A world that, once, only lived in her head. And finally, in a touch of poetic symmetry, the very last shot filmed on set was not a dramatic confrontation or a romantic embrace. It was a close-up of Lily's hand, planting a single flower in the soil. A reshoot done late into post-production, long after the rest of the film had wrapped. A simple gesture. Quiet. Wordless. But in that image, the crew felt everything the story was trying to say. We break. We grow. And sometimes, even in the strangest corners of filmmaking chaos, something beautiful blooms. There are some films that shake you by the shoulders, forcing you to look at the world through a cracked lens of violence, love, and impossible choices. It Ends With Us does not shake. It doesn't scream. It simply stays. It lingers. And in doing so, it becomes a quiet kind of revolution. A story that doesn't try to solve pain but lets it breathe, lets it move through every room, every silence, every breath that its characters take. For critics and audiences alike, It Ends With Us has been as divisive as it is devastating. Because it asks a question most films try to avoid. What does it mean to love someone who hurts you? From the very first scene, there's an undercurrent. A tension that builds not from spectacle, but from restraint. Lily Bloom stands above her father's grave and says what so few female protagonists are ever allowed to say, that she does not grieve him. That his death did not steal something precious from her. And with that, the film plants its flag, not in romanticism, not in revenge, but in honesty. The kind of honesty that doesn't perform. It just exists. Raw and necessary. Critically, this moment reframed the emotional axis of the story. Lily is not introduced as a woman seeking love. She's introduced as someone escaping legacy. A survivor who, despite her delicate appearance and soft tone, carries more steel than most action heroes. And that, right there, is the film's first great subversion. It doesn't celebrate strength through violence. It celebrates it through boundaries. As the plot unfolds, critics began to observe a deliberate pacing in how the love story between Lily and Ryle is told. It's almost seductive in its innocence. The rooftop meeting. The flirty banter. The hesitant dive into intimacy. It feels like every other romantic drama for just long enough to lull you into comfort. But that, critics argue, is precisely the point. The structure itself is a mirror to real-life cycles of abuse, how they often begin in euphoria before slowly twisting into something else entirely. Ryle's character, as portrayed by Justin Baldoni, becomes a lightning rod for this discourse. He is charming, brilliant, and believable. It is precisely because he's not a monster that his violence becomes so devastating. And for critics with backgrounds in trauma psychology and domestic abuse advocacy, this portrayal was both lauded and scrutinized. Lauded for its authenticity. Scrutinized for how dangerously familiar it felt. What makes Ryle chilling, one critic wrote, is not the violence itself, but the fact that you understand why Lily loved him in the first place. That understanding is crucial. Because without it, the story becomes black and white. And it ends with us refuses that simplicity. It lives in the gray. And the second Ryle crosses that line. During that first jarring moment of physical abuse, the film slows down. The camera doesn't cut away. It doesn't dramatize. It holds. It lingers on Lily's shock, her silence, her internal conflict. Critics noted how the cinematography mimics a trauma response, how the world gets smaller, how time stretches. That scene became one of the most discussed in early reviews. Not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. It was quiet, still, terrifying. And then came the discourse around Lily's response. She stays. She forgives. She listens to his apologies. And that, critics agree, is where the film's emotional resonance strikes hardest. Because it dares to show the part of abuse that most narratives skip, the aftermath. The rationalizations. The hope. The denial. Blake Lively's performance becomes a vessel for every woman who ever thought, maybe it was just once. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe he didn't mean it. Her portrayal is not loud or hysterical. It's haunted. And because of that, it became a Rorschach test for audiences. Some saw weakness. Others saw resilience. But everyone saw themselves. The film's midpoint, when Lily discovers she's pregnant, serves as a thematic fulcrum. From a narrative standpoint, it raises the stakes. But from a critical lens, it changes everything. Suddenly, Lily's choices are no longer just about her safety, they're about legacy. Critics praised how the film doesn't treat pregnancy as a plot twist, but as a moral reckoning. The question isn't, what should she do? It's, what must end with her? The answer comes slowly, painfully, through quiet scenes of reflection, letters from the past, and the reappearance of Atlas. Now, Atlas. His role in the story could have easily fallen into trope. First love returns to save the girl. But critics were quick to notice how deliberately the film avoids that. Atlas doesn't rescue Lily. He reminds her of who she was before survival demanded compromise. Their scenes together are drenched in memory, but not in fantasy. He doesn't beg. He doesn't plead. He simply offers her the space to choose. And that, as critics noted, is the most radical form of love the film presents. And then there's the resolution. Lily doesn't end up with Ryle. But she doesn't end up with Atlas either, at least not right away. Instead, she ends up with herself. That final moment, when she holds Emmy and tells Ryle, "She will never know a man like you," became the emotional apex of the film. A scene that critics called a quiet revolution. There is no courtroom battle. No dramatic escape. Just a woman looking a man in the eye and saying, "This ends with me." That line alone, echoing the book's title, became a cultural moment. It was quoted in reviews, shared across social media, and printed on T-shirts. But it wasn't just a line. It was a declaration. And for critics watching through the lens of societal patterns, it represented something much larger than fiction. It represented change. Many critics noted how the film's emotional impact wasn't just built on story, but on craft. The use of sound, or lack thereof, was frequently mentioned. The scenes of violence weren't underscored by music. They weren't cinematic. They were clinical. Quiet. And that silence created discomfort. Intentional discomfort. The kind that forces you to sit with what you've just seen, without the emotional cue of a soundtrack to tell you how to feel. The cinematography, too, was praised for its subtle symbolism. The flower shop, always drenched in warm, earthy tones, became a symbol of growth and rebirth. The apartment, increasingly sterile, mirrored Lily's internal withdrawal. Critics noted how even lighting choices followed Lily's emotional journey, warm to cold, light to shadow, and finally, to something soft and steady by the film's end. But not all feedback was glowing. Some critics argued that the film, by softening the book's most brutal moments, risked minimizing the severity of abuse. Others questioned whether Ryle was portrayed with too much empathy, potentially blurring the line between understanding and justification. These debates weren't flaws, they were fuel. They made the film a conversation, not a conclusion. And that, in the eyes of many, was its greatest success. In terms of reception, It Ends With Us became a litmus test for personal experience. Critics who had lived through similar relationships wrote about the film through tears. Those who hadn't sometimes struggled to understand Lily's choices. But across the board, one consensus held true: this film mattered. It sparked something that too many films shy away from. Not just empathy, but reflection. And that's the quiet genius of It Ends With Us. It doesn't promise healing. It doesn't glorify pain. It simply shows you what it looks like to make a different choice. To stop a cycle. To say, even when it hurts, enough. Critically, this is the film's legacy. Not in box office numbers. Not in awards. But in its courage to sit in the silence between heartbreak and hope and find strength there. There's a certain kind of quiet chaos that follows any film adaptation of a beloved novel, but It Ends With Us didn't just carry expectations. It carried a movement. 1,000,000 underlined passages. 1,000 tear-stained pages. And a fandom that knew every beat of Lily Bloom's journey as intimately as their own pulse. So when production on the film finally began, it was less like a typical shoot and more like trying to distill an emotional reckoning into 120 minutes of screen time. What unfolded behind the scenes was not just a process of filmmaking, but one of translation, trust, and a few wonderfully strange detours along the way. The journey began, fittingly, in a swirl of uncertainty. Long before cameras rolled, the very idea of adapting It Ends With Us had stirred debate. Was it too heavy? Too delicate? Could any actor truly capture the aching nuance of Lily Bloom or the terrifying charm of Ryle Kincaid? Even Colleen Hoover herself admitted she was nervous. The novel, after all, had become more than a story. For many, it was a lifeline, a way of putting words to pain that often goes unnamed. So to bring it to the screen meant walking a tightrope between artistic interpretation and emotional fidelity. Enter Justin Baldoni, not just the film's male lead as Ryle, but also its director and one of its key creative architects. From the beginning, Baldoni approached the project with a kind of reverence rarely seen in adaptations. He'd read the book. He'd listened to the fans. And he knew the power of the source material wasn't just in its plot twists, but in its pauses, in the moments where Lily says nothing, does nothing, but feels everything. So he shaped the production around that silence, around the in-between. One of the first creative decisions made was to age the characters up. In the book, Lily is in her early 20s, and Ryle just a few years older. But in the film, they're portrayed by Blake Lively and Baldoni, both actors in their mid-30s. The choice sparked immediate controversy online, but what most people didn't know was that the decision was actually rooted in realism. Colleen Hoover herself endorsed it, explaining that if she were to write the book again, she'd place Lily and Ryle in a later stage of life. "They've lived more," she said, "and the stakes feel different when you've been through more." Filming took place primarily in Hoboken, New Jersey, a city that ended up standing in for Boston thanks to its historic architecture and quiet charm. But no one could have predicted the bizarre coincidence that would shape the shoot's opening week. A florist shop, almost identical to the one described in the book, was already operating just 3 blocks from the primary location. The production team originally planned to build their own flower shop set, but when they saw this place, with its hand-painted signage and wild bouquets spilling out the front door, they scrapped the original plan. The owner, a woman named Elise, was not only a Colleen Hoover fan, she had read the book 5 times. She ended up becoming an unofficial consultant on all the floral details for the film, advising the set decorators on arrangements, seasonal blooms, and even how Lily's hands should move while tying stems with twine. Blake Lively, cast as Lily, dove into preparation with the kind of methodical curiosity that's earned her a reputation for vanishing into characters. She spent weeks visiting real flower shops, learning the language of petals and soil. But more importantly, she worked closely with women who had lived through the same kind of domestic trauma depicted in the story. Through tearful, off-the-record conversations, she built a portrait of Lily not just from the script, but from real life. "Lily isn't a victim," Blake once said on set. "She's a survivor who dares to believe in love anyway. And that kind of courage has layers." But it wasn't all intensity and emotion. The set had its fair share of absurdity too. One day, during a particularly heavy shoot involving a pivotal breakup scene, a nearby bakery sent over a massive tray of cupcakes. Not just any cupcakes, each one frosted with tiny quotes from the novel. As the crew sobbed through takes, they were also nibbling on sweets that read things like, "Just keep swimming," and "Cycles end with you." It was the kind of juxtaposition that left everyone laughing through their tears. Baldoni later joked, "It's the only time I've seen Blake cry and eat red velvet at the same time." Justin Baldoni, wearing both director and actor hats, often had to perform intensely emotional scenes, then immediately turn around and review the footage behind the monitor. One of the strangest production rituals emerged from this duality. Before every emotionally heavy scene, Baldoni would take 5 minutes alone, not in a trailer, but tucked in a corner of the set, staring at the ceiling. It became a running joke among the crew, Justin's rebooting. But those quiet moments helped him transition from character to conductor, making sure that what was captured on film remained true to the spirit of the story. As for Brandon Sklenar, who played Atlas, he almost didn't audition for the role. Originally attached to another project, he stumbled upon the script by accident, sent over by a friend who knew how much the novel meant to him. He read the entire thing in one night, sent in a self-tape the next day, and was cast within a week. On set, his chemistry with Blake Lively was immediate, not in a firework kind of way, but in a low, slow burn that the crew described as unspoken history. Their first scene together, a quiet walk through a street market, was almost entirely improvised, filled with glances and half-finished sentences that never made the script but were kept in the final cut. The emotional climax of the film, where Lily finally tells Ryle that she's ending the relationship for the sake of their daughter, was shot in a single, uninterrupted take. Baldoni and Lively had rehearsed the scene multiple times, but when the cameras rolled, something shifted. Lively didn't blink. Her voice didn't break. She held the silence between each line like a thread stretched tight. When the scene wrapped, there was no applause, no direction, just stillness. And then, slowly, the crew began to cry. Not because it was sad, but because it was true. The set design was filled with tiny details most viewers will never notice, but they mattered deeply to the crew. Inside Lily's apartment, there's a bookshelf filled with battered novels, many of which came from Colleen Hoover's own collection. Tucked between them is a photo of a young girl holding a paper flower. That girl is Colleen's niece, who inspired one of Lily's childhood scenes. On the kitchen counter, a mug with the phrase, "I bend so I don't break," sits in plain view, though it's never mentioned. And on the wall behind the flower shop register, a handwritten quote, "Love should never leave a mark." No one in the film points it out. But it's there, always watching. Perhaps the strangest and most serendipitous moment of production came on the final day of filming. They were shooting the scene where Lily walks with her daughter, Emmy, through a city park, reflecting on the future. Out of nowhere, a stranger approached the crew, not an actor, not part of the team. She was walking her dog and paused when she saw the cameras. After a few moments, she quietly said to a production assistant, "That's the book that helped me leave." She didn't ask to stay. She just watched from a distance, hand over her heart, as they captured the last shot. That moment, unscripted and unrehearsed, summed up everything the crew had been working toward. Because It Ends With Us was never just about telling a story. It was about reflecting one. And in the quiet spaces between takes, in the laughter that bloomed during the darkest scenes, and in the strange, sweet surprises that seemed to fall from the sky, it became something more than a film. It became a truth, stitched together with camera tape, memory, and the unshakable power of starting over. Some stories don't need grand cities or sprawling landscapes to take root. Some, like It Ends With Us, bloom quietly in the corners of ordinary streets and tucked-away spaces, as if their power doesn't lie in the scale of their setting, but in the intimacy of it. This is not a film that leans on the grandeur of location to make its impact. It leans on closeness, on quiet, on familiarity. The kind of places you've walked through without realizing they might one day hold something sacred, or something shattering. From the first frame, the world of It Ends With Us feels lived in. Not manufactured. Not made for screen. It hums with the echo of real conversations, of daily routines, of emotions that linger long after the lights are turned off. And this is where the film's magic quietly takes hold. Its setting and cinematic design don't just support the story. They mirror it. They hold it, shape it, and, at times, even speak for it. Though the original novel is set in Boston, much of the film was shot in Hoboken, New Jersey, a decision driven by both logistics and, strangely, poetic coincidence. Hoboken, with its red brick walk-ups, narrow sidewalks, and ivy-covered fences, carries the same East Coast charm and history as Boston but without the commercial polish. There's something about Hoboken that feels more accessible, more grounded. And that became essential to the filmmakers. Because Lily Bloom's world had to feel like a place you could walk through. A place that could be yours, or your sister's, or your best friend's. Her flower shop is perhaps the most emotionally saturated space in the entire film. Nestled between two understated storefronts on a quiet side street, the shop is both metaphor and sanctuary. It's built in layers, like Lily herself. The front windows are cluttered but curated. Inside, light spills softly through the glass, illuminating petals and vases like stained glass windows in a chapel. No space is wasted. Every corner, every shelf, tells you something about her. A postcard tucked into a mirror. A handwritten note taped behind the cash register. A tiny music box hidden behind a vase. These aren't just props. They're emotional breadcrumbs. The production design team created the shop from the ground up inside a real retail space, transforming it over weeks into something that felt hand-touched and worn in. Florists were brought in as consultants, not just to teach Blake Lively how to arrange bouquets, but to help shape the physical flow of the space. One insisted that every floral workspace needed to look like organized chaos. And so it was. The front of the shop was beauty, the back was mess. Cut stems, twine, scissors, buckets of soaking blooms. It was important, the director said, to show that even the most beautiful things begin in disorder. Lily's apartment is a stark contrast. It's quieter, more minimal, but still layered with meaning. The filmmakers designed it with a kind of emotional architecture in mind. Every piece of furniture, every light fixture, was chosen to reflect where Lily was in her journey. Early in the film, her apartment is open and airy. Soft throw blankets, yellow pillows, a record player humming gently in the background. But after her first traumatic experience with Ryle, the space subtly changes. The lighting becomes colder. Curtains are drawn. Objects are moved. The color palette fades. Even her plants begin to wilt. It's not spelled out in dialogue, but the viewer feels it. Her sanctuary has become uncertain. Ryle's environment, in contrast, is sharp, structured. His apartment is ultramodern, stainless steel appliances, minimalist art, and precise lines. Nothing feels soft. Nothing feels vulnerable. The visual message is clear. He controls everything in his space. And when Lily steps into it, she doesn't blend in. She becomes the burst of color, the unpredictable element. And the tension between them, long before it escalates, is already being communicated in their surroundings. And then there's the park. A quiet, unassuming green space just outside the city that becomes the backdrop for one of the film's most emotional sequences. It's here, pushing her daughter Emmy in a stroller, that Lily speaks aloud her decision to end the cycle of abuse. The trees are tall, old. The wind moves slowly through their branches. The bench she sits on is worn, with initials carved into the wood. This place doesn't announce itself, it simply allows. Allows space. Stillness. It's a cinematic breath, a soft landing at the end of a jagged journey. The lighting in this film deserves its own conversation. Natural light dominates most of the scenes. Daylight is used to great emotional effect, sometimes golden and inviting, sometimes harsh and unflattering. The cinematographers were obsessed with windows. Reflections. Shadows cast across faces at just the right angle. Scenes often begin with light finding Lily before the camera does, a glow on her shoulder, a beam across her face. It's as if the story itself is always searching for her, trying to understand her. Night scenes, by contrast, are sparse and haunting. Rather than relying on the usual blue-tinted movie night, the film uses real darkness, interrupted only by slivers of lamplight or the flicker of passing cars. One particularly heartbreaking scene, set after Lily's second encounter with Ryle's violence, takes place almost entirely in silhouette. You can't see her tears. You can only hear them. The absence of detail becomes the detail. The filmmakers weren't afraid of shadow. They leaned into it. Because they knew that silence and darkness, when used right, can scream louder than dialogue ever could. The color grading in post-production was handled with an almost painterly touch. Warm sepias for moments of nostalgia. Desaturated grays for scenes of emotional withdrawal. Rich earth tones in the flower shop to signify grounding and growth. And always, always, a careful avoidance of oversaturation. The world of It Ends With Us isn't hyper-real. It's not polished to perfection. It's flawed, familiar. And that's what makes it hurt the way it does. Even camera movement became a language of its own. The film rarely uses handheld shots, but when it does, it's deliberate. During moments of emotional unraveling, fights, breakdowns, flashbacks, the camera unsteadies, mirroring Lily's inner turmoil. But in quieter scenes, especially those with Atlas, the camera moves slowly. It tracks. It breathes. One scene, in which Lily and Atlas share a quiet meal in a restaurant, uses a single dolly shot that circles them slowly, as if time is folding around them. You don't even realize it's happening until it stops. And that's the point. The direction is invisible, but it shapes everything. The film also plays with framing in ways that critics were quick to notice. Lily is often filmed through doorways, behind glass, reflected in mirrors. This consistent motif, of seeing her through something, speaks to the emotional barrier between who she is and what she allows the world to see. Only in the final scenes do we begin to see her head-on. Centered. Clear. It's subtle, but it lands. There's a particularly powerful moment near the end, set inside the flower shop, where Lily is alone, arranging a bouquet. The shot is simple, over her shoulder, hands moving with muscle memory. But the color palette has changed. Brighter now. The music is absent. All we hear is the rustling of petals. It's a metaphor in motion. She's choosing, creating, living. Even transitions between scenes carry weight. The editor often uses overlapping audio, starting the next scene's sound before the cut, letting voices and echoes bleed into one another. It creates a dreamlike flow, especially in the sequences that involve memory or internal reflection. One scene, where Lily reads a journal entry aloud, is intercut with flashbacks so seamlessly that past and present become indistinguishable. Critics called it emotional time travel, and that's exactly what it feels like. In the end, what the setting and cinematography of It Ends With Us accomplish is nothing short of a visual echo. Every wall, every light, every camera angle. They don't just support the story, they reflect it. And in doing so, they make the emotional weight of the film not just something you understand, but something you feel. Something that settles in your chest like a second heartbeat. Because this film doesn't shout. It whispers. And the world it creates is one you don't just see. You remember it. It began, as many emotionally heavy films do, with laughter. Before the first slate clapped, before the sets were dressed and cameras rolled, the cast and crew of It Ends With Us gathered in a modest rehearsal space with one unspoken understanding. This would not be a light film to make. This was not a story that allowed distance. It would demand emotional excavation from everyone involved, from the actors delivering gut-wrenching monologues to the production assistant standing just off-screen, silently absorbing every heavy pause. And so, in the days leading up to shooting, they leaned on something fragile and necessary: connection. What surprised everyone most was how much laughter filled those early days. Blake Lively, cast as Lily Bloom, arrived with a kind of magnetic ease. She joked about her lack of floral arrangement skills, told stories between takes, and disarmed even the most nervous of crew members. She called it emotional balancing. If they were going to explore pain so deeply on camera, they needed lightness behind it. Her presence became grounding. Whenever scenes spiraled into tension, Blake was the one to bring everyone back to center with a sly smile or perfectly timed comment. The heaviness of Lily's arc never dulled her own spirit, it just deepened it. Justin Baldoni had a different weight to carry. As both Ryle and the film's director, he wore two masks, one of the man who loses control and the other of the man orchestrating the world around him. Shifting between those roles was not easy. One crew member remembered how, in between directing camera movements and blocking scenes, Baldoni would pause, lean against a wall, and close his eyes for just 60 seconds. It was like watching someone turn down the volume on one version of themselves so they could turn up another, she said. It became a ritual. The moment of quiet before becoming Ryle. There were days when the lines between acting and emotion blurred too closely. During one scene where Ryle breaks down in front of Lily after a violent episode, The entire room went still. No one moved when the director yelled cut. Not even the director, because he had just been the one in the scene. The silence hung like fog. Then, a voice from the boom mic operator, "That hurt." Everyone exhaled, laughed softly, shook it off. But they all felt it. Because that was the kind of film they were making. One where make-believe pulled real emotions out of real people. Blake and Justin's dynamic on set was a balance of precision and trust. They rehearsed scenes again and again, not because they wanted them perfect, but because they wanted them true. If something felt even a little forced, they'd stop, rework, rewrite. Some of the most intimate lines in the film, those whispered moments between Lily and Ryle, were restructured on the fly. Not because the script was wrong, but because the moment needed something more honest, less polished. The lines only mattered if they felt like something someone would say when no one was listening, Blake once said between takes. Atlas, played by Brandon Sklenar, brought a different energy altogether. Quiet, observant. He was often seen pacing the edges of the set, headphones in, mouthing lines not as rehearsal, but as meditation. Unlike the tension in scenes with Ryle, his moments with Blake were marked by stillness. During filming, one camera operator remarked that you could hear your own heartbeat in a scene with them. They didn't overact. They listened. And that restraint created a kind of cinematic silence that said everything without needing to say anything. But behind the camera, that calm was constantly interrupted by the real world. One of the biggest challenges the crew faced was their location. Hoboken, New Jersey, chosen for its East Coast charm and architectural likeness to Boston, proved visually perfect but logistically chaotic. A bakery across the street from Lily's flower shop set ran a daily special with a loud bell that rang every time a customer walked in. During emotional scenes, this bell would interrupt takes at the worst possible moments. One day, during an emotional confrontation scene, the bell rang 8 times in the span of 3 minutes. Eventually, the crew struck a deal with the bakery. Unlimited coffee in exchange for silence during filming hours. Another challenge was weather. Though most of the film is grounded in soft natural light, overcast skies, and gentle ambience, the summer in New Jersey that year was anything but cooperative. One day, a sudden thunderstorm flooded a location 5 minutes before the crew arrived. Equipment had to be rerouted, costumes soaked, and production delayed by hours. But out of that chaos came something unexpected. As the crew dried off and waited, they shot an impromptu scene. Lily arranging flowers in a stormlit shop, rain pattering against the glass, the outside world blurred into watercolor. It was never in the script. It ended up in the final cut. The costume department had its own set of unique hurdles. Blake's wardrobe, particularly her now infamous oversized corduroy pants, became a meme long before the film even premiered. But those choices were deeply intentional. The team wanted Lily's clothes to reflect her individuality, her practicality, her softness. She dresses for herself, the costume designer explained. Even when she's trying to keep it together on the outside, her wardrobe whispers what she can't say aloud. Still, the viral commentary on social media forced the team into defense mode. Blake, true to form, laughed it off. "If the pants are what people are talking about, wait until they see the story," she said during a press interview, raising a single eyebrow. Despite the emotionally charged nature of the scenes, the set was filled with small comforts. A quiet tent was created just off-set, a dimly lit space with tea, blankets, and noise-canceling headphones. After particularly draining scenes, cast and crew could retreat there to decompress. One intern called it the emotional recovery zone. On more than one occasion, Blake brought in homemade baked goods, complete with sticky notes that read things like, "You did something brave today." Those notes were often tucked into back pockets, kept between script pages, or stuck to camera rigs. Colleen Hoover visited the set twice. The first time was low-key, a quick tour and a few behind-the-scenes photos. But the second visit was different. She arrived just as the crew was preparing to shoot one of the film's final scenes, Lily's quiet declaration that the cycle of abuse ends with her. Hoover watched from behind the monitor. When the scene wrapped, there were no claps. Just tears. Colleen quietly stepped forward, hugged Blake, and whispered, "That's her. That's Lily." There were technical mishaps too, of course. One scene had to be res hot because a background extra walked through the frame holding a coffee cup labeled Ryle, a detail that didn't belong in the scene's timeline. In another, a sound tech forgot to turn off their walkie and accidentally broadcast their lunch order during a serious take. Turkey wrap. Extra mustard. But those moments of imperfection brought levity. Reminded everyone that even when you're making something soul-stirring, it's okay to laugh. The final days of filming were marked by a sense of gentle mourning. The cast and crew had lived inside this emotional world for so long that letting go of it felt strangely intimate. On the last night shoot, as they wrapped the final scene, Lily walking with Emmy through the park, the crew stood in silence. There was no applause. Just stillness. The first assistant director finally whispered, "That's a wrap," and for a long time, no one moved. Then Blake smiled, lifted Emmy's stroller with one hand, and said, "Let's go plant something." No director's chair. No loud music. Just quiet. Just memory. Just the end of something that had, for a few fleeting months, become a second skin for everyone involved. And so the film wrapped the same way it was made, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with care. With truth. With people who knew that telling a hard story with honesty wasn't just a job. It was a responsibility. Of all the stories that have reached across pages and screens to pull people in, It Ends With Us is one of those rare ones that doesn't ask to be loved, it asks to be understood. It isn't built to charm you or sweep you away into a fairy tale. It's built to hold a mirror up to some of the most painful parts of the human experience and ask, with quiet grace, what will you do differently? What makes this film echo so deeply isn't just its story, it's what lives beneath it. The marrow of it. The layered themes and symbolism that wrap around every moment like a second skin. At the center of it all is the theme of breaking cycles. That's what this entire story spins around. Not just romantic entanglements or individual trauma, but the inheritance of pain, the passing down of silence, and the burden of histories that were never asked for. From the moment Lily stands above her father's grave and tells the truth of what he was, the film signals to us, this is not about love in the traditional sense. It's about the love you choose to leave behind. The legacies you choose to reject. The futures you refuse to repeat. That legacy begins with Lily's mother, silent, subdued, a figure in Lily's memory who didn't scream, didn't run, didn't fight. And yet, that silence wasn't indifference. It was entrapment. Her mother, like many women in her generation, endured abuse behind closed doors, teaching her daughter not through words, but through what she tolerated. Lily's great fear is that she's inherited that same endurance. That same silence. And for a while, she does. She justifies Ryle's violence the first time. Then the second. Because somewhere deep down, she believes that maybe this is what it means to love someone broken. But then comes the turning point, the pregnancy. And it becomes the film's ultimate metaphor, life growing in the middle of wreckage. A new beginning asking a hard question. And Lily realizes that she cannot protect her child with hope. She can only protect her with action. This is the moment where the theme shifts from survival to choice. The power of it. The fear of it. The cost of it. Another major theme, equally vital, is the duality of love and harm. Ryle Kincaid isn't written or portrayed as a one-note villain. He's brilliant, charismatic, even kind. And that's what makes his actions so disorienting. The film refuses to make this easy for the audience. It doesn't let us look away from the contradiction. Because in real life, the people who harm us are often the same ones who once made us feel safe. That's the heartbreak. That's the trap. And for Lily, the journey is not about suddenly hating Ryle. It's about accepting that love, even deep love, is not enough when it comes at the cost of safety. That sometimes, the bravest thing a person can do is walk away from someone they still care for. This grayness, this unwillingness to simplify abuse, is one of the film's most powerful elements. It forces the audience to sit in discomfort, to recognize that love stories can still be tragic even when the abuser isn't a monster. That's what makes Lily's decision so courageous. Not that she leaves a monster, but that she walks away from a man she once believed could be her future. Then there's memory, threaded through the narrative like a pulse. The flashbacks to Lily's teenage years, her time with Atlas, are not just exposition. They're symbols of what love looked like before trauma took root. Atlas, with his soft-spoken warmth and quiet survival, becomes more than a love interest. He becomes a benchmark, a reminder. He's not the savior of the story, but he is the echo of a life Lily once imagined for herself, before she started compromising for love that hurt. Symbolism bleeds through every frame of the film, often so subtly that you only realize it in retrospect. The flower shop, for instance, is more than a setting. It's an extension of Lily herself. A place she built with her own hands. A space that blooms in defiance of everything she endured. Each flower arrangement is an act of control in a world where so much felt uncontrollable. And the flowers themselves carry coded messages, a tradition in floral arrangement that the filmmakers wove into the story's DNA. Lilies for purity and rebirth. Peonies for healing. Baby's breath for everlasting love. Every bouquet Lily touches becomes a form of silent storytelling. Even the act of planting carries weight. In one scene, Lily is shown pressing seeds into the soil, her fingers covered in earth. It's a quiet moment, but symbolically seismic. It's not just gardening. It's reclamation. It's the act of choosing to grow something when the past keeps trying to choke it out. The recurring motif of water is also deliberate. It's always present in moments of change or reflection. The rooftop scene where Lily first meets Ryle happens beneath a darkening sky. Her memories with Atlas often take place near a river, a reflection of their fluid connection, their ability to meet each other in movement, not resistance.